Hey there, it's Silver. This is Cuisineer. So this is an action RPG where you run a restaurant and you murder adorable monsters for your ingredients. So this is the kind of game that is very much in the lineage of stuff like Racketeer that helped establish genres like this, what feels like so long ago now. And in fact, one of the achievements in this game is a direct reference to that game. So they're very much showing their colors there. So the idea here is pretty simple. Your parents have been horrendously irresponsible and have left you with a restaurant and thousands of gold in debt. And it's your job to actually get this restaurant back on its feet, repair it, fill it out, get more patrons, and eventually, of course, learn all sorts of fancy dishes that you can sell to make all this money back. You'll start out pretty humbly with just a really small restaurant with just a single cooking station, a couple of tables and chairs, and a very small clientele. But as you go, you'll meet more NPCs and do all sorts of quests to learn new recipes and expand your operation to larger and larger heights to actually be able to serve more fancy stuff and have a much larger number of people in there at once. And of course, in between days where you're actually opening up your restaurant to serve, you're also going into dungeons, delving into various dungeons that you'll find along the way in order to acquire your ingredients. And in fact, pretty much all the ingredients come from sentient manifestations of those things. So if you want some peppers, then you gotta actually beat these adorable pepper things that breathe fire on you. Or if you want some coconuts, you gotta go beat up a sentient palm tree. This means that all the things you can actually cook each day are determined by what dungeons you've been to recently and thus what kinds of ingredients you actually have in stock. So when it comes to the art style, the game is very cute. It's going out of its way to be as cutesy as possible, and it does a really good job. Your main character is adorable, all the NPCs that you can meet are adorable, all of your customers are adorable, and all the monsters are very cute as well. So everything about this world is super cute, and it does kind of avoid that, like, saccharine sweetness a little bit by making everything just a little bit funny. You know, it's not too overly cutesy because there's some humor here and there that kind of intersperses the cuteness to make it not quite so, like, saccharine. This is a point that I would directly compare to Racketeer, actually, which was another very cutesy game, but it had a good amount of, like, humor and silly capitalism stuff and things mixed in there to where it wasn't all cute all the time. It was also quite silly. So when it comes to actually running your restaurant, there are several things you got to keep in mind. First off, are your customers, because different customers will want different things. And they also have sort of different stats, you could say. So, for instance, child customers tend to order lower on the menu in terms of price. They're probably not going to be getting the filet mignon when they come in, but they also run and eat really fast, so they're not in the store for very long, but they're also not very patient. So once they've ordered, you got to cook their food pretty quick, or else they'll leave in a huff. So you got to make sure to serve them quickly. Whereas, for instance, elderly customers are the exact opposite. They walk around very slowly and take a long time to order and eat their food, but they're also very patient when it comes to waiting for their food, which, by the way, in my experience is absolutely not how that works. Usually elderly customers are your more rude, entitled people, but we'll go with it. And there are also other customers to worry about, like, for instance, the city guards. The city guards move at a pretty average pace, and they tend to order and stuff at a pretty average pace, but they eat really fast. So they're patient, but they're also out of there really quick once they actually get their food, because they got to get back on to patrol. And there are also, eventually, once you're able to get the right furniture and stuff to attract them, you'll find royals that'll come in. And these will, of course, order your top-tier food, generally speaking, some of the most expensive stuff you can make, and they'll tip very well. But, well, you see, normally, once you make food, it is placed on a countertop, free counter space, and the customer will come up and grab it and go back to their table and eat. Royals, however, will not do this. They expect you to serve them, so you have to actually take the food to their table by hand. Once they've chowed down on their food, they will line up in front of the cash register in the middle of the store, and you have to actually go over there and have them pay. It's just a simple one-button press. Just stand in front of the counter and press the button, and they'll pay automatically and then leave the store. And you'll also get a bit of a tip in green there above the normal amount they pay for the dish, and the tip seems to mostly be determined by the actual base price of the dish that they ordered, but it also, I think, is determined a little bit by what kind of customer they are. You've also got a clock in the top right, and you can of course only stay open for so long because eventually you have to sleep. But there are also a couple of colored banners on the clock, and these represent different rushes. So at first, the green one over there is the lunch rush, and once this happens, you will get a large glut of customers very quickly. So you've got to be pretty much top of your game when this happens because there's going to be a bunch more people in the store than usual. In fact, there's usually going to be so many that you don't have enough tables for all of them. If this happens, customers will stand around with a little table symbol above their head showing that they need to sit, but there's no space for them, and they will wait for a little while, but eventually they will get mad and leave, and you'll lose that customer. So the idea is, of course, once a customer finishes eating and goes to pay, then they'll free up a space. So as long as you can keep serving people quickly enough, you can keep circulating people in and out fast enough to not have this problem eventually. And this is why you want to start buying more tables and stuff to put down once you start expanding your restaurant. The purple banner is the dinner rush, and this works exactly the same way as the lunch rush. You're going to have a ton of people come in here for dinner. Oftentimes I find that the dinner rush is actually more populated than the lunch rush. I'm not sure if this is on purpose or if this is just what I've experienced so far. But yeah, so these rushes are your big times that you definitely want to be open for, since they represent a large amount of customers coming in and out very quickly. There's also that bottom orange one, which is tea time, which actually won't do anything for you at first, but from what I understand, it's basically used once you get a whole bunch of sweet recipes. So when you first start out, you won't have any of those really to serve, but once you do get a bunch of them, you'll start getting a bunch of customers during tea time that want sweet stuff. You can upgrade your restaurant in various different ways. You have just standard upgrades, which will take various resources and a bunch of money and will take 2 days to complete. And once it's complete, it will expand physically. It'll actually get larger inside so you can place more stuff. And each upgrade will also increase a couple of different things depending on the upgrade. So you might get more counter space, for instance. You can have more prepared dishes out at once. Or you may get spaces for more stations, so you can actually cook more things at once. Or even the ability to place more fridges so that you can store more ingredients at once. And as the main floor space of the restaurant increases in size, you can place more stuff. And there are all kinds of different things that you can place, from, of course, tables and chairs, which allow more people to be seated and actually eat, to rugs, paintings, lights, wall lamps, windows, and all sorts of things like that. These have multiple uses. For one, they're just for cosmetic use to make your restaurant look how you want, but they also tend to attract more customers of specific types. So while it is cool to just pick stuff because you like the look of it and you're going for a certain theme, it's also nice to pick stuff based on the fact that you may want more customers of certain types because they're more valuable and things like that. And if it does do this, it'll show you a little preview of the types of customers that it tends to attract when you're hovering over it in the menu, and also a little arrow gauge that'll show you how much of an attractive effect it has to them. All furniture and tables and stuff like that from the carpenter's shop does actually take materials and money. You won't be buying things for just money. And the various materials are things that you can get from dungeon delves. You can also walk around town in general and just talk to people. And people will often have side quests for you, and these are extremely important. Even though there are side quests, I actually recommend doing as many of them as possible, because side quests award you new recipes. You'll actually get a couple of basic recipes automatically the first time you pick up a new ingredient, but if you want your more advanced stuff, then you gotta actually complete side quests in order to get them, and each recipe has a nice big full screen drawing of what it is, as well as a pretty well written description that the NPC will give you before giving it to you, which is a pretty cool touch. The side quests generally involve giving that NPC a specific number of a certain thing. Sometimes they want just some materials, other times they may want a certain type of weapon, sometimes they want entirely finished dishes. But yeah, there will be a lot of side quests that you have access to. You'll usually have like a good 8 or 10 or 12 of them at a time, because there isn't really a limit and you want as many as possible so that you can be working towards them to expand your restaurant's repertoire of possible dishes. And each dish has its own value as well as its own star rating. And this is important because you can, whenever you're not opened, you can walk up to any of your placed cooking stations and spend some money and materials to upgrade that station. And the first upgrade will increase the number of dishes you can queue up on it at once, so if you get really busy, you can queue up multiple dishes on each station and have them all cooking automatically. And then the upgrade after that will allow you to cook a higher star dish than you could before, and then the upgrade after that will go back to increasing its queue, and then, so on and so forth, until you can eventually cook your big fancy 4-star dishes, although this does take a lot of upgrades and a lot of materials to actually do, so you won't be able to do this at first. But you do want to unlock the ability to cook the higher star dishes as soon as you can, because they are drastically more valuable, so they're going to help you out a lot if you're able to actually cook them. As you would expect, higher star dishes have more complex recipes with more individual ingredients, and they also take longer to cook, so if someone orders one, you've got to get it on the cook as quick as you can, because their patience will be ticking down the whole time. So yeah, if you have a whole bunch of patrons at once, then you're going to want to cook the highest complexity ones first so that they get done sooner. Each station also has its own unique list of things that it can cook. So if you're having a bunch of patrons that want some baked stuff, then you can only use the oven for that. But if they want fried stuff, then you can use the pan for that. So you've got to learn which stations can cook which dishes. And the station will hopefully have a little symbol above it to show you that someone wants something from that particular station to help you out a little bit. The dungeon crawling is relatively fun. You've got 2 weapon slots you can equip to whatever weapons you want, and the weapons are, of course, as you would predict, all food-themed. So, like, great sword is a giant chef's knife, and instead of, like, throwing bombs, you throw durians. Every weapon has a basic attack combo as well as a dash attack. You do have a dash for dodging purposes, and they also have some sort of special attack on the triggers that's on a long cooldown. So, for instance, the big chef's knife does a big overhead slam that fires forward like a sword beam. And the idea is you will choose a dungeon, and each dungeon has its own specific set of materials for building and upgrading stuff, as well as its own set of actual living ingredients for you to beat. So if you want a lot of peppers and spices and stuff, then you're going to want to go to the desert area. But if you want to make a whole bunch of sparkling water and things like that, then you're going to need pieces of ice from the frosty area. And each dungeon will consist of a sort of randomly generated number of pieces stitched together, usually pretty well, and they'll have some nodes that you can harvest materials from, as well as a ton of enemy spawns for you to beat, and enemies will usually drop their ingredients when you kill them, although not always, depending on the number of enemies. Like some of the smaller enemies that come in huge waves have a lower drop rate, so that you don't necessarily get like 1 ingredient per enemy every time. Each dungeon also has its own set of hazards to avoid, like the jungle area having floor spikes and dark traps, whereas of course the desert area has like lava traps and stuff like that. And then eventually you'll find a staircase at the end that will take you to the next floor. And as you go up in floors, you'll find some rarer and more powerful enemies, as well as eventually a boss at the end. I think each one is 6 floors long. Although it will take you quite a lot of gameplay before you can actually get to the boss and beat it, because it does get very difficult very quickly. Enemies scale up in health and damage quite rapidly as you go through the floors. You can also bring boba teas with you, which are your potions. Each boba tea has a different effect. The one you start with is just a simple instant heal, and you can upgrade each tea in order to increase its effects of whatever it does by bringing the boba stand some recipes. They want specific dishes, and you can give them the required number of those dishes in order to upgrade the teas, and you can also give them usually more advanced dishes to research new teas so that you can buy those. You have a limited amount of belt space. You start with just 1 belt slot, so you can only take 1 tea with you at first, but there are these 2 slots for traveling merchants that will show up, and each different day has a different set of merchants that shows up in these slots, and one of the merchants is a tailor, and you can spend some gold to increase your backpack space so that you can hold more ingredients on dungeon runs, and also increase your belt spaces up to 4 so that you can hold more potions. Some of the other NPCs there involve like a rug seller, a highly enchanted weapon seller that also sells like massively expensive furniture that attracts royals and stuff, and a couple of other people like that. There's also another use for finished dishes aside from just, selling them to patrons or using them for side quests. You can also brew equipment. You can give your pieces of equipment to a character for a day and then give them a dish to brew it, and then get, basically it's an enchanting system. You get enchantments on that piece of gear depending on what you brewed it with, and higher tier dishes have a better chance of having more potent effects, that are basically all the more desirable effects you're going to find on like your 3 and 4 star dishes. So basically this game has a food-based enchanting system, which is a pretty cool idea. So as far as complaints or criticisms that I would have, one of the biggest ones is the combat feels kind of weird sometimes, and this is mostly because the enemies in this game are incredibly tanky. The enemies start out very spongy for your basic attack. You can go to the smith to upgrade your weapon, but it only upgrades it currently by 1 attack damage per upgrade, and you have to actually leave the weapon with them for an entire day and spend a bunch of money and stuff in order to actually get this upgrade, so it's absolutely not worth it. It is not worth it at all. They are planning on addressing this, I think, and causing the upgrades to be more significant instead of just 1 damage per, so hopefully that helps. But yeah, I do find that as you ascend the floors in a dungeon, the enemies get extremely frustratingly tanky in this game and have way too much health. Once you reach like floor 3 or 4, it's not uncommon to be wailing on huge crowds of what were previously fodder enemies that you could kill in 2 hits, and just sit there hitting them over and over and over again, and they just won't die. So yeah, I think something might need to give in terms of how this game balances its enemy increase in health and stuff as floors go up, because it's clear that you do not really have ways to increase your damage all that rapidly, but the enemies will rapidly increase in health every dungeon floor. And there's also just a couple of quality of life things that I feel are missing, like for instance, the ability to exempt specific ingredients would be nice. Maybe because flour is a super common ingredient and you're constantly faced with huge hordes of enemies that drop flour in large numbers, maybe you've got plenty of flour and you don't want to pick any of it up anymore. But the game automatically picks up any ingredients near you. It vacuums them all towards you. So you're going to be picking up tons of flour that you don't actually want and filling up your inventory very quickly and not have any room for the stuff that you actually do want. Now, you can go to your inventory and drop stuff that you don't want, but going into your inventory does not pause the game, so you've got to find a safe place to do this every time you want to do it. And I feel like it would just be much easier and a much more pleasant experience to be able to exempt specific ingredients before I even start a run, to say, hey, don't pick these up, so that it automatically avoids them. This way you don't have to waste time trying to manage your inventory and dropping stuff you don't want, and can instead simply tell the game, hey, on this run, don't pick these, and these up so I can focus on other things. There's also one other issue that they accidentally created themselves. Basically, in order to help you hold more per dungeon run, they decided to increase the stack size to 30. It was previously 20. So now you can hold 20 items per stack, which is nice. It's a good change. I appreciate that. Except they only changed it for your inventory. So when you go back home and put your stuff in a fridge or put your materials in a chest or whatever, they still only stack up to 20, which means you can have a full inventory and then not actually be able to put it all away, because it doesn't, the stacks change size in between inventories, which doesn't make any sense. So I would recommend that they change the stack size of everything in your containers as well as in your inventory to be the same. That way you're not changing stack sizes in between, because that doesn't really make any sense to me, honestly. But yeah, so despite a couple of quality of life things and the fact that the enemies do get annoyingly spongy at times, I think this is a pretty adorable little game, and it's actually quite a bit of fun. If you are a fan of games like Racketeer, or you like that sort of management RPG style of doing things, this has quite a lot going for it. It could have a more involved and complex cooking system. It's pretty simple. It could have more involved and complex combat, but what it does have is still a pretty good time, and I think it is probably worth the asking price for you if you are a fan of games like this, because this is a niche within a niche that isn't catered to all that often. You know, games like Racketeer and stuff like that, they don't come around all that often, so anything that is sort of in that vein is usually worth checking out, and this is definitely no exception. So I'll put the link in the description below this video to the Steam store page for Cuisineer. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.